How do information systems support business processes? As we've mentioned before, information flows back and forth between different components of a business process. But what do the information systems do and how do they impact those processes? That depends on the nature of the business process and the nature of the information system. For some business processes, you may have an entire information system devoted to supporting that process, okay, depending on the size of your organization and its information needs. Um, so if you have a large corporation, you may have a specific application, hardware, software, data procedures, and people dedicated to your sales function, taking orders, processing it, and so on. If you're a small organization, maybe a small business, you may have a single information system that handles multiple business functions. And as we'll get into once we start talking about enterprise application systems, there are large systems that take care of multiple business processes as well. So it's going to depend on your information needs, the complexity of your business, and the complexity of the information that's involved. Okay? But as a general rule, we can say that information systems are there to support the business processes, and they can do it at varying levels of what we call automation. Automation means we're taking something that is frequently done by people and transitioning it so that it's more done by hardware, computer hardware. So, as an example, some years ago, before um, automated checkout systems were put in place, cashiers at the grocery store had to manually type in the price of the goods that were coming across the line into the cash register. So you had there a piece of hardware, but the sole job of that hardware was to add up the numbers that were entered into it. It was a large calculator and cash holding machine. Over time, checkout stands have evolved and become more automated so that now the, um, the process at which you check out goods in a grocery store is frequently scanning the items across some sort of laser scanner that reads a barcode, looks up the inventory item number, calculates its price, and processes it all so that the role of the cashier is to simply scan items and then take money and enter it into the system. The system calculates the change and the cashier makes the change. So this is a process that has become more automated over time. Gradually, more and more of the activities are being taken care of by the computer hardware instead of the person. And some researchers and product developers are planning a day in which all of this will be taken care of in an automated fashion, in which, say, radio frequency ID tags may be embedded into your products, like basically glorified price tags. You'll walk through a scanner, and that scanner will also be able to read maybe payment data from your cell phone, and everything will happen automatically. And there won't be any cashier need involved. Okay, um, so that would be an example of a more fully automated activity. So there's this continuum you can kind of visualize of what we call more manual processes versus more automated processes. And I use the term more manual process because in today's day and age, in today's business environment, there are very few activities that are purely manual. Okay? If I go out and weed in my garden, that's a manual process. But much of what I do at work is to some degree automated. Okay? So it just depends on the level at which you're looking at things. But there are activities that may be more suited toward automation and more suited toward the more manual end of the spectrum. So, but we generally classify things as automated, semi-automated, or manual. Okay. So one of the things in determining whether when you're building this system, should a process be automated or semi-automated or manual, is look at how structured that process is. If it's highly structured and doesn't differ a lot, then you can probably automate it. If there's a lot of variability, then you probably can't. Okay? As an example, an automated decision. Awarding credit is increasingly an automated decision. Data is pulled from a customer's credit report, and some sort of company mathematical function is applied to it to approve credit for a certain amount. So that's a fairly automated process. However, developing the company's strategy is an unstructured process. Okay, it takes a lot of variables and it's going to differ based on a lot of contextual factors. So depending on the structure of the process and how much it varies or how much it changes based on the context will impact how automated it is. Something else you want to think about when automating a process is whether it meets the business goals of the organization. And by business goals, I'm not just talking about making something more efficient. It may cost less to automate something, but it may not meet the needs of the organization. For example, if you've been to the Polynesian Cultural Center and you've ridden on the canoe ride doesn't vary a lot. The student employees generally have the same script that they follow with the same corny jokes. The canoe ride follows the same track back and forth. It wouldn't take a whole lot of engineering to completely automate that ride so that you have something like more like a Disneyland ride function where people sit in a canoe, a speaker plays a pre-recorded message introducing them to all the sights and sounds of the Polynesian Cultural Center, and maybe a conveyor pulls them back and forth through the lagoon at the PCC. But if we were to do that, we'd lose something that's built into the purpose of the PCC, and that the Polynesian Cultural Center is there to provide um, both funding for student scholarships or student wages, as well as employment for students to pay for their education. So it's an ethical consideration that you need to keep in mind is just because we can automate a process doesn't mean we should. There are benefits to automation. We can scale, we can grow and process a lot if we automate. So if we automate, for example, test taking in this class, then by giving you multiple choice computer-based exams, uh, we can process a lot more students and assess performance. But we do lose something by giving that type of uh, exam. There may be other ways and more creative endeavors that students could get involved in that we could use to assess their learning. But an automated versus perhaps more subjective trade-off has to occur at some point when you're dealing with scale. Amazon.com could not function their sales processing as a manual system. It has to be automated. Similarly, with Google's indexing of search pages, that has to be an automated process. But there are areas, like the canoe ride at the PCC, where maybe a manual process or a semi-automated process is preferable. So you as future managers will need to keep these issues as well as others in mind when you're answering the question for yourself, how do these information systems support business processes?